Hey guys, tonight we step into a world where gods ruled from the clouds, where love could spark a war, and a single glance from a god could change your life forever. These weren't just stories. To the ancient Greeks, they were the truth, and every temple, every statue, every myth you've ever heard began here. Before we begin, if you enjoy quiet, dark stories from the past, feel free to support the channel with a free subscription. And tell me, where are you watching from right now? I read every comment. It's always wild to see people tuning in from all over the world. Now take a breath and settle in. This is Myth Night, where you relax and I tell you true stories from the forgotten past. And if you fall asleep before the end, that's okay. Some stories were made to be finished in dreams. Picture yourself standing at the edge of time itself, where the very concept of existence hangs in perfect balance between something and nothing. Tonight, we're going to take a journey that spans the entire arc of Greek mythology, from the first stirring of consciousness in an empty universe to the final echoes of heroic legend that still whisper through our modern world. This isn't just a collection of separate stories about gods and monsters. It's one vast, interconnected saga that reveals how the ancient Greeks understood everything from the creation of the cosmos to the deepest fears and hopes that drive human nature. By the time our journey ends, you'll see how every myth connects to every other, how each god's personality shaped the world they ruled, and how stories told thousands of years ago still influence the words we speak and the symbols we recognize today. We'll discover why Zeus feared one prophecy so much that it changed the course of divine history. You'll learn the shocking truth about Pandora's box and why hope was the last thing to emerge from it. We'll walk through the actual geography of the underworld, meet heroes whose names have become synonymous with courage and cleverness, and uncover the hidden connections that link every thread of this vast mythological tapestry. But this journey begins where all journeys must, at the very beginning, in a place where even the concept of beginning didn't yet exist. In the time before time, when the universe consisted of nothing but endless, empty potential, there existed only chaos. Not the disorder we think of today, but something far more profound, a vast, silent void that contained within itself every possibility that would ever unfold. Imagine trying to picture absolute nothingness, then realize that even your mental image is too complicated, too full of structure and meaning. Chaos was simpler than anything we can conceive, yet from this perfect emptiness, everything would eventually emerge. The first stirring of creation was subtle beyond description. From chaos itself came the primordial beings, not gods as we would later understand them, but the fundamental forces that would give structure to existence. Gaia, the earth, emerged not as a goddess standing on solid ground, but as the very concept of solidity itself, the foundation upon which all other things could rest. Picture the moment when the first particle of matter condensed from pure possibility. That was Gaia awakening, not just creating the earth, but becoming it. Her consciousness was the first stable point in an ocean of potential, a place where things could finally be said to exist rather than merely being possible. As Gaia took form, other primordial forces awakened around her. Nyx, the night, wrapped the newborn reality in darkness that was somehow comforting rather than frightening. This wasn't the absence of light, but the presence of rest, of dreams, of the quiet spaces where consciousness could gather itself and prepare for what was to come. Erebus, the deep darkness beneath the earth, provided the hidden foundations that would support everything visible. And Eros, not the romantic love we imagine today, but the fundamental force of attraction that would drive all future creation, began to weave connections between things that had previously existed in isolation. But Gaia, alone with her consciousness in a universe still largely empty, felt something that even primordial beings could experience: loneliness. So from her own substance, she brought forth Uranus, the sky. Imagine the first blue dome stretching overhead, vast and clear and infinite. Uranus wasn't just the sky above, but every possible sky, every shade of light and weather that would ever exist. Together, Gaia and Uranus formed the first partnership in creation. From their union came children who would define the next great age of the cosmos, the Titans. These beings were vast beyond human imagination, each embodying a fundamental aspect of existence. Kronos controlled time itself, feeling every moment stretch and contract according to his will. Rhea brought fertility and abundance, teaching the world how to grow and change. Oceanus became the great river that encircled the earth, while Hyperion carried the light that would eventually become the sun. But with the birth of the Titans, family conflict entered the universe for the first time. Uranus, looking upon his strange and powerful children, felt the first stirring of a fear that would echo through every generation of gods to come: the terror of being surpassed by one's own offspring. In his paranoia, he forced the Titans back into Gaia's womb, trapping them in the deep places of the earth where their power could grow but never threaten his rule. Gaia endured this cruelty as long as she could, but the earth itself has limits to its patience. When Kronos, her youngest and cleverest son, was born, she had prepared a weapon from her own substance, a sickle sharp enough to cut divine flesh. In a moment that would define the relationship between generations for all time, Kronos struck down his father, freeing himself and his siblings from their underground prison. But Uranus, even as he retreated into the farthest reaches of the sky, spoke a prophecy that would haunt his attacker forever. Just as you have overthrown me, so too will one of your own children overthrow you. These words planted a seed of fear in Kronos' heart that would eventually grow into madness. The Titans ruled during what many consider the golden age of divine history. They governed with a light touch, allowing the world to develop according to its own natural rhythms. Forests grew wild and beautiful, mountains rose in majestic ranges, and the seas teemed with life forms that existed nowhere else in creation. This was a time when the boundary between the divine and natural worlds was almost non-existent. But Kronos could never forget his father's prophecy. When his wife Rhea bore their first child, Kronos felt terror overwhelm his judgment. Rather than risk being overthrown, he devoured the infant immediately after birth. This pattern continued with each child. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, all were swallowed before they could pose any threat to their father's rule. When Zeus was born, Rhea had finally reached her breaking point. She hid the infant away on the island of Crete and presented Kronos with a stone wrapped in swaddling clothes. The Titan, perhaps blinded by his own paranoia, swallowed the deception without noticing. Zeus grew up in secret, nursed by the goat Amalthea and protected by the Curetes, who clashed their shields to mask his cries. But he wasn't just growing in size and strength. He was developing a sense of justice that his father completely lacked. When Zeus returned as an adult, he came bearing a potion that would force Kronos to vomit up his swallowed children. They emerged not as the infants they had been when consumed, but as fully grown gods, each radiating power and barely contained fury at their father's crimes. What followed was the Titanomachy, a war that would reshape the very foundations of existence. This wasn't just a conflict between different groups of gods, but a battle between two completely different philosophies of power. Kronos and the older Titans fought to maintain a system based on fear and absolute control. Zeus and his siblings fought for something unprecedented, a form of divine rule based on shared power and justice. The war lasted for 10 years, with battles that shook the earth and split the sky. Zeus freed the Cyclopes from their underground prisons, and in gratitude, they forged weapons that would tip the balance of the conflict. For Zeus, they created the thunderbolt, lightning itself shaped into a weapon. For Poseidon, they forged a trident that could shake the earth and command the seas. For Hades, they crafted a helmet of invisibility that would allow him to move unseen through any battlefield. The final battle saw Zeus standing atop Mount Olympus, hurling thunderbolts that illuminated the entire cosmos. When Kronos finally fell, defeated and exhausted, Zeus didn't repeat his father's mistakes. Instead of ruling through fear, he divided power among his siblings, creating a new kind of divine government that would prove far more stable than the tyranny it replaced. With the Titans defeated and a new order established, the stage was set for the age that would define Western civilization's understanding of the divine. The Olympians had arrived, and they would rule not from hidden strongholds, but from the highest peak in Greece, visible to all who looked up at the sky and wondered about the forces that shaped their world. High above the clouds, where the air is so thin that mortal lungs could never draw breath, rises Mount Olympus in majestic splendor. Its snow-capped peak touches the very dome of the sky, and there, in a palace built from crystallized starlight and marble quarried from the bones of the earth itself, the 12 great gods of Greece established their eternal court. Zeus, king of this divine family, ruled from a throne carved from a single massive sapphire that reflected the sky's every mood. His presence filled any room he entered, not with overwhelming force, but with the quiet certainty of absolute authority. When he spoke, his voice carried the rumble of distant thunder, and when he was truly angry, lightning would dance between his fingers like living serpents. But Zeus was more than just power made manifest. He was the god of justice, the final arbiter when conflicts arose between gods or mortals. His decisions carried the weight of cosmic law, and even other Olympians accepted his judgment, however reluctantly. Yet Zeus was also famously unfaithful to his wife, and these romantic adventures would drive many of the most important myths in Greek legend. He might appear to mortal women as a shower of gold, a swan, or even a bull, but his divine nature always shone through, leaving behind children who would become heroes, monsters, or gods themselves. Beside Zeus sat Hera, queen of the gods and protector of marriage and family life. She was beautiful beyond mortal imagination, with eyes like polished amber that could see through any deception, and a voice that could command the loyalty of any creature that heard it. But Hera's beauty was matched by a jealousy so intense it could shake the foundations of Olympus itself. She spent much of her time pursuing revenge against Zeus's lovers and their children, not out of simple spite, but from a genuine belief that the sacred institution of marriage had to be defended, even from her own husband's violations. Poseidon, Zeus's brother, ruled all the waters of the world from his undersea palace built from coral and pearl. His trident could calm the most violent storms, or whip peaceful seas into ship-destroying fury. He rode across the waves in a chariot, pulled by horses that could gallop across the surface of the ocean as easily as across dry land. Poseidon's moods were as changeable as the sea itself. He could be generous and life-giving one moment, then deadly and destructive the next. Sailors would pour wine into the waves before every voyage, hoping to earn his favor for safe passage. In the deepest realm beneath the earth, Hades ruled the kingdom of the dead with grim efficiency. He wasn't evil, as later traditions would sometimes portray him, but rather the ultimate administrator of cosmic justice. Every soul that died would eventually stand before his obsidian throne to receive judgment based on their deeds in life. His realm was vast beyond imagining, containing fields of asphodel where ordinary souls wandered in peaceful but dreary existence, the blessed Elysian fields where heroes found eternal joy, and the terrible depths of Tartarus where the truly wicked suffered punishments that's matched to their crimes. Demeter, goddess of the harvest, had hair the color of ripe wheat and eyes like rich earth after rain. Her gentle touch could make barren fields bloom with abundance, but her grief could curse entire continents with famine. She taught mortals the secrets of agriculture, showing them how to plant seeds and tend crops, how to read the signs of weather and season. But when her daughter Persephone was kidnapped by Hades, Demeter's sorrow was so complete that she withdrew her gifts from the world, and nothing would grow until her child was returned. Athena, goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare, had been born fully grown from Zeus's head, already clad in silver armor and carrying a spear that had never missed its target. She had gray eyes that missed nothing, and a mind that could solve any puzzle, win any debate, or devise any strategy. Unlike Ares, who reveled in the chaos of battle, Athena represented warfare at its most noble, fighting to protect the innocent, defend the just, and maintain civilization against the forces of chaos. Apollo, god of music, poetry, prophecy, and the sun, was perhaps the most beautiful of all the Olympians. His hair shone like spun gold, and when he played his lyre, even the savage beasts would lie down peacefully to listen. He drove the chariot of the sun across the sky each day, bringing light and warmth to the world below. But Apollo could also be vengeful when slighted. His silver arrows carried plague and sudden death to those who offended him. Artemis, Apollo's twin sister, was goddess of the hunt and protector of young women. She had asked Zeus to grant her eternal virginity, and she guarded her chastity as fiercely as she protected the wild creatures under her care. She ran through moonlit forests with a pack of silver deer, her bow never missing its target. Artemis was kind to those who respected nature and honored their families, but she showed no mercy to those who threatened the innocent or violated the natural order. Ares, god of war, was perhaps the most feared of all the Olympians. Where Athena represented noble combat, Ares embodied raw violence and bloodshed. He stood 7 feet tall, with muscles like iron and eyes that burned like coals. When he appeared on battlefields, warriors would be seized by an uncontrollable fury that made them forget all thoughts of mercy or quarter. Even Zeus disliked his violent son, calling him the most hateful of all the gods. Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, had risen from the sea foam near Cyprus, already perfect in every detail. No mortal or immortal could look upon her without feeling desire, and her laughter could heal hearts broken by loss or loneliness. But Aphrodite's love was not always gentle. She could inspire passion so intense it destroyed lives, relationships so obsessive they led to madness. She was married to Hephaestus, but loved Ares, creating a divine love triangle that would influence countless mortal affairs. Hephaestus, god of fire and metalworking, was the only Olympian who was not perfectly beautiful. He walked with a limp from being thrown from Olympus as an infant, but his skill at the forge was unmatched in all creation. He could craft armor that would turn any blade, weapons that never missed their targets, and automatons so lifelike they seemed to breathe. His forges lay beneath volcanoes around the world, and the smoke that emerged from their peaks was evidence of his constant work. Finally, there was Hermes, messenger of the gods and guide of souls to the underworld. He wore winged sandals that allowed him to fly faster than thought itself, and he carried a staff called the caduceus that could heal any wound or disease. Hermes was clever and charming, but also a notorious trickster who delighted in elaborate pranks and schemes. He protected travelers, merchants, and thieves, anyone who relied on quick wits and quicker feet to make their way in the world. Those 12 gods, ruling from their mountain palace, would shape every aspect of Greek civilization. Their personalities, conflicts, and relationships would provide the framework for understanding everything from natural phenomena to human psychology. But they were more than just explanations for thunder and earthquakes. They were complex characters whose stories revealed deep truths about power, family, love, and the eternal struggle between order and chaos. And it was through their interactions with mortals that some of the greatest stories ever told would unfold, tales of heroism and tragedy that continue to captivate audiences thousands of years after they were first spoken around fires in ancient Greece. In the early days of divine rule, when the Olympians were still establishing their authority over the world, a titan named Prometheus looked down at the newly created human race and felt something that would change the course of history: compassion. Humans huddled in caves, vulnerable to wild animals and harsh weather, while the gods enjoyed the warmth and light of divine fire in their mountain palace. Prometheus saw potential in these fragile creatures, intelligence that could grow into wisdom, creativity that could rival the gods themselves. Against Zeus's explicit commands, Prometheus stole fire from the heavens and gave it to humanity. But this wasn't just physical flame, though that was part of it. This was the fire of knowledge itself, the spark that would allow humans to build cities, create art, develop medicine, and gradually master their environment rather than simply surviving in it. Zeus's rage when he discovered this theft was terrible to behold. Thunder shook the earth for days, and lightning split the sky from horizon to horizon. But the punishment he devised for Prometheus was even more terrible. The Titan was chained to a mountain peak in the Caucasus, where every day an eagle would tear out his liver, and every night it would grow back, ready to be torn out again. But Zeus wasn't finished. He decided that if humanity wanted fire, they would pay a price for it. He commissioned Hephaestus to create a woman from clay, and each god contributed something to her nature. Athena gave her skill with handicrafts, Aphrodite granted her beauty and charm, Apollo bestowed musical talent, and Hermes provided her with curiosity so powerful it could never be satisfied. This woman was named Pandora, meaning all gifted, and she was sent to Epimetheus, Prometheus's brother, as a bride. She carried with her a sealed jar with strict instructions never to open it. But curiosity, as Zeus well knew, was one of humanity's defining characteristics. When Pandora finally lifted the lid, not from malice but from the innocent desire to know what was hidden, outpoured all the evils that would plague humanity for the rest of time: disease and death, war and famine, jealousy and hatred, despair and madness spread across the world like a dark cloud. But just as Pandora moved to close the jar in horror, one last thing emerged: hope. Smaller and more fragile than the evils that had preceded it, but somehow more persistent, hope would give humanity the strength to endure whatever sufferings the gods might send. From this mixed blessing and curse arose the heroes, mortals who possessed some trace of divine blood, usually through a god's romantic involvement with a human. The greatest of these was Heracles, son of Zeus, and the mortal woman Alcmene. From birth, he displayed strength beyond anything previously seen in a mortal, but his divine heritage also made him a target for Hera's jealousy. The 12 labors of Heracles became legendary throughout the ancient world. Each task seemed impossible for a mortal to accomplish, yet Heracles succeeded through a combination of divine strength, human cunning, and pure determination. He strangled the Nemean lion, whose hide was impervious to weapons, with his bare hands. He cleaned the Ogygian stables by diverting 2 rivers to wash away 30 years of accumulated filth. He captured the golden hind of Artemis, tamed the Erymanthian boar, and retrieved the golden apples of the Hesperides from the garden at the world's edge. But perhaps the most revealing labor was his descent into the underworld to capture Cerberus, the 3-headed dog that guarded the gates of death. This task forced Heracles to confront his own mortality, to journey to the one place from which no living person had ever returned. When he succeeded, he proved that heroism wasn't just about physical strength. It was about having the courage to face the impossible and find a way through it. Another hero, Perseus, demonstrated that cleverness could be as valuable as strength. When challenged to bring back the head of Medusa, the Gorgon whose gaze turned living creatures to stone, Perseus didn't try to overpower his enemy through brute force. Instead, he used a polished shield as a mirror, approaching Medusa while looking only at her reflection, and struck off her head while she slept. From Medusa's blood sprang Pegasus, the winged horse that would carry Perseus on future adventures. When Perseus later encountered the sea monster threatening to devour Princess Andromeda, he didn't engage in heroic combat, but simply held up Medusa's head, turning the creature to stone in an instant. Perseus showed that true heroism often lay in finding creative solutions rather than relying on obvious approaches. Theseus, Prince of Athens, chose a different path to heroism. Rather than accepting the safe sea voyage to his father's city, he deliberately took the dangerous overland route, seeking out monsters and bandits to fight along the way. He defeated Procrustes, who forced travelers to fit his bed by stretching them or cutting off their limbs. He overcame Sinis, who would bend pine trees to the ground and catapult victims through the air. When Theseus arrived in Athens, he found the city paying a terrible tribute to King Minos of Crete. Every 7 years, 7 young men and 7 young women were sent to be devoured by the Minotaur, a creature half man and half bull that lived in an elaborate labyrinth beneath the palace. Theseus volunteered to be one of the sacrificial victims, not because he had to, but because he refused to ask others to face dangers he wouldn't face himself. In Crete, he met Ariadne, daughter of King Minos, who fell in love with him and provided him with the key to surviving the labyrinth, a ball of thread that would allow him to retrace his steps after killing the Minotaur. Theseus succeeded in his mission, but his treatment of Ariadne afterward revealed that even heroes could be flawed. He abandoned her on an island during their escape, showing that courage in battle didn't always translate to honor in personal relationships. The story of Jason and the Argonauts demonstrated the power of cooperation among heroes. No single member of their crew could have obtained the Golden Fleece alone, but together they overcame challenges that would have been impossible for any individual. Their journey showed that true heroism often required working with others, combining different strengths and abilities to achieve a common goal. But perhaps the most complex and tragic hero was Odysseus, whose 10-year journey home from the Trojan War became the template for every adventure story that followed. Odysseus faced monsters and gods, witches and sirens, storms and treacherous seas, but his greatest enemy was his own pride. Time and again, his cleverness would save him from seemingly impossible situations, only for his need to boast about his achievements to create new dangers. When he encountered the Cyclops Polyphemus, Odysseus's quick thinking allowed him and his men to escape from the monster's cave by hiding beneath sheep. But instead of sailing away quietly, Odysseus couldn't resist revealing his true name and taunting his victim. This moment of pride brought down the curse of Poseidon, Polyphemus's father, extending Odysseus's journey home from a few weeks to 10 years of suffering. The Trojan War itself began with what seemed like a simple beauty contest. When the goddesses Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite asked Paris, Prince of Troy, to judge which of them was fairest, each offered him a bribe. Hera promised power over all of Asia. Athena offered wisdom and skill in battle, but Aphrodite's offer proved most appealing. She promised him the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. That woman was Helen, already married to Menelaus, king of Sparta. When Paris and Helen fled to Troy together, it triggered the most famous war in ancient literature. Nearly every major Greek hero joined the expedition to reclaim Helen and restore Menelaus's honor. The war lasted 10 years, long enough for an entire generation to grow up knowing nothing but conflict. Heroes on both sides performed deeds that would be remembered for thousands of years. Achilles, the greatest Greek warrior, was nearly invincible in battle, but was ultimately killed by an arrow to his heel, the one spot where he was vulnerable. Hector, Troy's greatest defender, became the model for noble sacrifice, dying to protect his city and family. But the war's end came not through heroic combat, but through Odysseus's cleverness. The wooden horse he designed, presented as a gift to the gods, but actually filled with Greek warriors, finally gave the attackers access to the city they had besieged for a decade. Troy fell in a single night, its treasures scattered, and its people killed or enslaved. These stories, woven together, created a tapestry that showed both the heights and depths of human nature. Heroes could be brave and clever, but they could also be proud and cruel. The gods might help mortals achieve greatness, but they might just as easily destroy them for trivial reasons. Victory came to those who combined strength with wisdom, but even the greatest heroes were ultimately mortal, subject to the same fate that awaited all living things. And that fate led, inevitably, to the realm that no amount of heroism could avoid forever. The shadowy kingdom where all journeys end and all debts are finally paid. Far beneath the sunlit world of the living, where no bird has ever sung and no flower has ever bloomed, lies a realm that every mortal soul must eventually enter. The journey begins at the river Styx, its waters black as midnight and flowing with a silence that seems to swallow sound itself. Here, in the misty borderland between life and death, the souls of the departed gather, waiting for passage to their final destination. Charon, the ancient ferryman, stands in his boat at the river's edge. His face is hidden beneath a hood, but his eyes gleam like cold stars in the darkness. He extends a skeletal hand, demanding payment for passage, a coin that the living place on the tongues of the dead. Those who cannot pay must wander the shores for 100 years before being allowed to cross, a reminder that even in death, the poor suffer more than the rich. The ferry moves silently across waters that reflect no light, carrying its passengers toward the massive gates that mark the entrance to Hades' domain. These gates are guarded by Cerberus, the three-headed hound whose size defies comprehension. Each head is larger than a lion, with teeth like daggers and eyes that burn with unnatural fire. But Cerberus has a peculiar nature. He allows anyone to enter the underworld, but prevents anyone from leaving. His presence serves as a reminder that death is a journey with no return ticket. Beyond the gates lies a landscape unlike anything in the world above. The sky, if it can be called that, is a dome of gray stone that seems to press down with the weight of eternity. No sun shines here, but a pale, sourceless light allows the dead to see their surroundings. The air carries no warmth, no scent of growing things, only the dry, dusty smell of things long buried. At the heart of this realm sits the palace of Hades, carved from a single block of obsidian, so dark it seems to absorb light rather than reflect it. The throne room is vast beyond measure, its ceiling lost in shadows, its walls lined with the skulls of creatures that died in the world's first days. Here, upon a throne that has never known warmth, sits the king of the dead. Hades himself is neither cruel nor kind, but something far more unsettling, completely impartial. He regards each soul that comes before him with the same detached interest a scholar might show when examining an interesting specimen. His judgments are based not on mercy or harshness, but on absolute justice, weighing each life with scales that cannot be bribed or influenced. Beside him sits Persephone, queen of the underworld, her beauty somehow made more striking by the darkness that surrounds her. For half the year, she reigns here as mistress of the dead, but her presence brings no softness to the realm's iron laws. She understands that death is not a punishment, but a natural part of existence, as necessary as birth or growth. The dead are judged by three ancient kings, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus, who had ruled with perfect justice in life and continued that role in death. They sit at a crossroads where the paths to different regions of the underworld diverge, and they direct each soul to the destination their earthly deeds have earned. Most souls travel to the asphodel meadows, vast fields of gray flowers that stretch to the horizon. Here, the majority of the dead spend eternity, not in torment, but in a kind of peaceful melancholy. They remember their lives but feel no strong emotions about them. They can speak with other souls, but find little to say. It is not punishment, but rather a neutral existence, neither blessed nor cursed. For those who had lived lives of exceptional virtue, a different path opens. The Elysian fields spread out like a vision of perfect spring, where it is always late afternoon on the most beautiful day imaginable. Here, heroes and kings, poets and philosophers, all those who had brought honor to themselves and benefit to others, spend eternity in joy. They can choose to be reborn if they wish, returning to life with no memory of their previous existence, but many prefer to remain in this blessed realm where pain and sorrow are unknown. But for the truly wicked, those who had committed crimes that shocked even the underworld's ancient stones, a deeper fate awaits. Tartarus lies far below the rest of Hades' kingdom, a pit so deep that it would take 9 days for a bronze anvil to fall from its rim to its floor. Here, the punishment fits the crime with perfect precision. Tantalus, who had killed his own son and served him as dinner to the gods, stands eternally in a pool of water beneath a fruit tree. When he bends to drink, the water recedes. When he reaches for fruit, the branches pull away. He suffers the torment of never being able to satisfy his hunger or thirst, a fitting punishment for one who had violated the most sacred bonds of hospitality and family. Sisyphus, who had thought himself cleverer than the gods and had tried to cheat death itself, pushes a massive boulder up a steep hill for all eternity. Just as he nears the summit, the stone rolls back down, and he must begin again. His punishment reflects his crime, endless, pointless effort that achieves nothing, just as his schemes had ultimately accomplished nothing but his own destruction. The Danaids, 50 sisters who had murdered their husbands on their wedding night, spend eternity trying to fill a bathtub with water, but the vessel has holes in its bottom. No matter how fast they pour, the water drains away, teaching them the futility of trying to wash away guilt through meaningless activity. But the underworld is not just a place of judgment and punishment. It is also the source of the earth's fertility. The realm of the dead lies beneath the realm of the living, and it is from this dark kingdom that new life springs. Seeds must be buried in earth, symbolically entering the underworld before they can grow. The cycle of death and rebirth that governs all nature has its origin in Hades' domain. This connection between death and life is embodied in Persephone's story. Her annual return to the upper world brings spring and growth to the earth, while her descent back to the underworld marks the beginning of winter. The Greeks understood that death was not the opposite of life, but an essential part of it, that endings made new beginnings possible. The underworld also serves as a repository of wisdom. The dead retain the knowledge they gained in life, and certain heroes were able to journey to Hades while still living to consult with departed spirits. Odysseus spoke with the shade of the prophet Tiresias to learn how to reach home. Aeneas met his father's spirit and learned about the future of Rome. But perhaps the most important truth about the Greek underworld is that it operates according to laws that apply equally to gods and mortals. Even Zeus cannot simply override Hades' decisions or bring back the dead without following proper procedures. Death is the one power that remains beyond even divine control, the one appointment that no amount of strength or wisdom can indefinitely postpone. This understanding shaped how the Greeks lived their lives in the world above. Knowing that death was inevitable, but judgment was based on earthly actions, they developed a complex moral system that emphasized honor, justice, and responsibility to community. The afterlife wasn't about eternal reward or punishment based on belief, but about the natural consequences of how one had chosen to live. And it was this interaction between divine and mortal, between the eternal and the temporary, that would create some of the most complex and fascinating stories in all of mythology. The relationship between gods and mortals in Greek mythology was never simple or predictable. Unlike the distant, all-knowing deities of some religions, the Olympians were personalities writ large, beings with human emotions and desires, but cosmic power to act on them. This created a dynamic that was by turns wonderful and terrifying, where divine attention could bring either salvation or destruction, often based on factors that seemed arbitrary to human understanding. When gods fell in love with mortals, the results were usually both magnificent and tragic. Zeus's affairs produced some of the greatest heroes in Greek legend, but they also brought divine wrath down on the mortal women who attracted his attention. Io was transformed into a cow to hide her from Hera's jealousy, then pursued across the world by a gadfly that gave her no rest. Europa was carried away to Crete on the back of Zeus, disguised as a bull, becoming the mother of kings, but losing her homeland forever. These divine romances followed a pattern that revealed uncomfortable truths about power and desire. The gods rarely courted mortals in any recognizable sense. They appeared, they desired, they took what they wanted. The consent of their mortal partners was rarely a consideration, and the consequences were always borne by the humans involved, while the gods moved on to other interests. But mortal women weren't always passive victims. Danae, locked in a bronze tower by her father to prevent any man from reaching her, still managed to conceive Perseus when Zeus visited her as a shower of gold. Leda, approached by Zeus in the form of a swan, bore children who would reshape the ancient worlds. These women found ways to maintain their dignity and agency even in impossible circumstances, and their children often inherited not just divine power, but human resilience. The gods' relationships with mortal men were equally complex. They might serve as mentors and patrons, guiding favored humans to great achievements, or they might become implacable enemies over seemingly minor slights. Athena's support of Odysseus during his long journey home was unwavering, but Apollo's hatred of the same hero for desecrating his temple brought years of suffering. Divine jealousy operated on a scale that mortals could barely comprehend. When the weaver Arachne claimed her skill rivaled Athena's, the goddess didn't simply dismiss the boast as human arrogance. She appeared in disguise to challenge Arachne to a contest, and when the mortal's tapestry proved truly superior, Athena destroyed it and transformed Arachne into a spider, condemning her to weave for eternity, but never again to create beauty that could challenge divine artistry. The story of Niobe illustrates how divine punishment could extend beyond the original offender. When Niobe boasted that she had more children than Leto, Apollo, and Artemis, Leto's twin children, killed all of Niobe's sons and daughters with their arrows. Niobe herself was turned to stone, weeping eternally for children who died because of her moment of pride. But gods could also show unexpected mercy and even learn from their interactions with mortals. When King Lycaon tried to trick Zeus by serving him human flesh, the god's punishment was swift and terrible. Lycaon was transformed into a wolf, the first werewolf. But Zeus also recognized that if even kings could be so corrupt, perhaps the entire human race needed a fresh start. The great flood that followed destroyed most of humanity, but Zeus allowed Deucalion and Pyrrha, two righteous mortals, to survive and repopulate the earth. The concept of divine justice was central to Greek understanding of god-mortal relationships. The gods weren't arbitrary in their punishments. They were upholding cosmic order, ensuring that pride didn't grow so great as to threaten the natural hierarchy of existence. When mortals forgot their place, divine correction followed as surely as thunder follows lightning. But this justice operated according to divine rather than human logic. The gods might punish innocent descendants for ancestral crimes, or spare obvious wrongdoers for reasons mortals couldn't understand. The house of Atreus suffered for generations because of Tantalus's crime against the gods, with each generation committing new atrocities that brought fresh curses down upon their children. Prophecy served as one of the most important links between divine and mortals' realms. The gods, who existed outside normal time, could see the threads of fate and occasionally shared glimpses of the future with mortals. But these prophecies were notorious for their ambiguity, often coming true in ways that their recipients never expected. When Croesus was told that crossing the river would destroy a great empire, he assumed it meant he would destroy his enemies. When Oedipus learned that he would kill his father and marry his mother, his very attempts to avoid this fate led him directly to fulfill it. The gods didn't lie in their prophecies, but they also didn't explain them, leaving mortals to interpret divine truth through the lens of human understanding. The oracle at Delphi became the most famous source of divine guidance, with the priestess Pythia channeling Apollo's wisdom for anyone who could afford the consultation fees. Rulers would travel from across the known world to ask about wars, plagues, and political decisions. The oracle's advice shaped the course of history, from the founding of colonies to the strategies used in great battles. But perhaps the most poignant aspect of god-mortal relationships was how they revealed the limitations of both divine and human nature. Gods, for all their power, seemed to need worship and recognition from mortals to give their existence meaning. They competed for the devotion of cities and individuals, becoming genuinely upset when mortals forgot to honor them or chose to worship other deities. Mortals, in turn, developed elaborate systems of worship and sacrifice, not just from fear, but from a genuine desire to maintain relationships with powers greater than themselves. They understood that they were part of a larger cosmic order, that their actions had consequences beyond the purely human sphere. The mystery cults that developed around certain gods offered mortals the possibility of more intimate divine relationships. Initiates into the Eleusinian mysteries, dedicated to Demeter and Persephone, believed they had gained special knowledge about death and rebirth that would benefit them in the afterlife. The cult of Dionysus promised ecstatic experiences that temporarily dissolved the boundaries between mortal and divine consciousness. These deeper religious experiences suggested that the relationship between gods and mortals didn't have to be one of simple domination and submission. Through proper ritual, sincere devotion, and sometimes direct divine invitation, mortals could achieve a kind of communion with the divine that transformed both parties. But even at its most sublime, the god-mortal relationship remained essentially unequal. Gods were immortal, mortals aged and died. Gods commanded cosmic forces, mortals struggled with basic survival. Gods could see the full pattern of fate, mortals lived moment by moment, making decisions based on limited information and uncertain outcomes. Yet it was precisely this inequality that made the relationship so meaningful. When gods chose to help mortals, it was a gift beyond price. When mortals managed to impress or move gods through their courage, wisdom, or devotion, it represented a triumph of the human spirit over seemingly impossible odds. The stories of these divine mortal interactions have resonated across millennia because they capture something essential about the human condition. Our awareness that we are part of something larger than ourselves, our desire for meaning beyond our limited lifespans, and our need to believe that our choices matter in the grand scheme of existence. And these ancient stories continue to shape our modern world in ways both obvious and subtle, influencing everything from the words we speak to the symbols we recognize, to the stories we tell ourselves about heroism, justice, and the nature of power. Walk through any modern city, and you'll find yourself surrounded by echoes of ancient Greece. The courthouse, with its marble columns, mirrors the temples where Greeks sought divine justice. The statue of a blindfolded woman holding scales references Themis, the Titaness who embodied cosmic law. Even the language we speak daily carries fragments of stories told thousands of years ago around fires in the ancient world. When we describe someone as having an Achilles heel, we're referencing the one vulnerable spot on the greatest warrior in Greek legend. The phrase captures something profound about human nature, the way even the strongest among us have hidden weaknesses that can prove our undoing. This isn't just a casual metaphor, but a concentrated piece of wisdom about hubris, vulnerability, and the unexpected ways that fate can strike. The term Odyssey has come to mean any long, eventful journey, but it carries within it the memory of Odysseus's 10-year struggle to return home. When we use this word, we invoke the understanding that meaningful journeys involve more than just physical travel. They require courage, cleverness, and the ability to learn from mistakes. An odyssey changes the traveler as much as it moves them from one place to another. Pandora's box has become synonymous with any action that unleashes uncontrollable consequences. But the original story contained a crucial detail often forgotten in modern usage. Hope was the last thing to emerge from Pandora's jar, suggesting that even when we face the worst consequences of our curiosity or ambition, the possibility of redemption remains. The Greeks understood that knowledge and suffering often come together, but they also believed that hope makes both bearable. When we speak of someone's Herculean efforts, we're not just describing hard work, but invoking the memory of labors that seemed impossible, yet were accomplished through a combination of strength, determination, and divine assistance. The word carries within it the understanding that the greatest achievements require more than human power alone. They demand the kind of effort that transforms the person attempting them. Nemesis has evolved to mean any formidable rival or downfall, but it originally described the divine force that ensured cosmic balance was maintained. When we say someone met their nemesis, we're suggesting that their destruction wasn't random, but rather the inevitable result of actions that upset the natural order. The concept reflects the Greek belief that pride and excess will eventually be corrected by forces beyond human control. The influence of Greek mythology extends far beyond individual words into the fundamental structures of storytelling itself. The concept of tragic heroes, protagonists whose very strengths lead to their downfall, comes directly from Greek drama. Characters like Oedipus and Antigone established templates that writers still follow today, creating protagonists who face impossible choices between competing moral demands. The idea of the hero's journey, popularized by Joseph Campbell but visible in everything from Star Wars to Harry Potter, follows patterns established in Greek myths. The call to adventure, the meeting with supernatural allies, the descent into the underworld, the return with wisdom or treasure. These story beats were perfected in tales of Perseus, Theseus, and Heracles. Modern psychology has borrowed extensively from Greek mythology to describe patterns of human behavior. The Oedipus complex uses the king who unknowingly killed his father and married his mother to describe certain patterns of child development. Narcissism references the youth who fell in love with his own reflection and wasted away from self-obsession. These aren't just clinical terms, but condensed wisdom about human nature that the Greeks discovered through careful observation of behavior and motivation. The visual arts continue to draw inspiration from Greek mythological themes. Renaissance masters like Botticelli and Michelangelo created some of their greatest works depicting scenes from Greek myths. Modern artists from Picasso to contemporary graphic novelists have found in these ancient stories a rich source of imagery and meaning that speaks to universal human experiences. Architecture around the world still echoes Greek temple design, not just in government buildings, but in banks, universities, and museums. The columns and pediments that mark important buildings in Western culture carry the implicit message that the knowledge and values housed within connect to something ancient and enduring. The Greeks built their temples to last forever, and in a sense they succeeded, not through stone, but through the continued relevance of the ideas those temples represented. The Olympic Games, revived in the modern era, deliberately invoke the Greek tradition of athletic competition that honored the gods while celebrating human physical achievement. The Olympic flame, carried from Greece to each host city, creates a direct physical connection between ancient and modern traditions of international competition and cooperation. Even our understanding of the cosmos bears Greek influence. Many of our constellations are named for Greek mythological figures: Orion the hunter, Cassiopeia the vain queen, Perseus the hero. When we look up at the night sky, we see the same patterns that ancient Greeks used to tell stories about divine conflicts and human aspirations. Astronomy textbooks become collections of mythological tales every time they describe stellar formations. The entertainment industry has found Greek mythology to be an inexhaustible source of material. Movies, television shows, books, and video games regularly adapt these ancient stories for modern audiences. The popularity of works like Percy Jackson or the God of War series demonstrates that these myths still speak to contemporary concerns about power, family, identity, and the struggle between individual desire and social responsibility. But perhaps the most profound influence of Greek mythology on modern life is how it shaped our understanding of the relationship between power and responsibility. The Greek gods were powerful, but not all good, intelligent, but not all knowing, immortal, but not unchanging. This complex view of authority has influenced Western political thought, encouraging skepticism of absolute power and the development of systems of checks and balances. The Greek concept of hubris, excessive pride that invites divine punishment, has become a crucial tool for understanding political and social failures. When leaders overreach or corporations ignore ethical constraints, commentators often invoke Greek mythological examples to explain how pride preceded the fall. The stories serve as warnings about the dangers of believing that human power can operate without limits or consequences, Greek mythology also provided the foundation for Western concepts of individual agency and moral responsibility. Unlike mythological systems, where fate is absolutely predetermined, Greek myths suggested that while certain broad outcomes might be fixed, individuals still had choices about how to respond to their circumstances. Heroes could choose courage or cowardice, wisdom or folly, honor or expedience, and these choices shaped both their characters and their ultimate fates. The therapeutic value of these ancient stories continues to be recognized by modern psychology. Mythological narratives provide frameworks for understanding personal struggles and growth patterns. Someone dealing with a difficult relationship with authority figures might find insight in stories about Zeus and his children. A person struggling with anger management might benefit from examining the consequences of Ares' unchecked rage. Educational systems around the world continue to teach Greek mythology, not just as historical curiosity, but as literature that offers essential insights into human nature. Students who read these stories learn about complex moral reasoning, the consequences of choices, and the ways that personal flaws can create larger social problems. The influence extends into the digital age as well. Video game designers draw on mythological themes to create compelling narratives about power, transformation, and heroic achievement. Social media discussions about justice, leadership, and social responsibility often reference mythological examples to make complex points more accessible. As we move forward into an uncertain future, the ancient wisdom embedded in Greek mythology remains remarkably relevant. Stories about the responsible use of power speak to contemporary debates about technology and governance. Myths about the consequences of environmental destruction resonate with modern concerns about climate change. Tales of heroes who must choose between personal desire and public good illuminate current discussions about leadership and sacrifice. The enduring power of these stories suggests that the Greeks discovered something fundamental about human nature that transcends cultural and temporal boundaries. Their myths continue to provide not just entertainment, but genuine wisdom about how to live meaningful lives in a complex and often dangerous world. As our journey through the vast landscape of Greek mythology draws to a close, we find ourselves where we began, contemplating the mystery of how something can emerge from nothing, how order can arise from chaos, how meaning can be created in an apparently indifferent universe. But now we carry with us the accumulated wisdom of generations who wrestled with these same fundamental questions and created stories magnificent enough to survive for thousands of years. We have traveled from that first moment when chaos gave birth to consciousness through the ages of primordial beings and titans to the establishment of the Olympian order that would define Western civilization's understanding of the divine. We have walked with heroes through their trials and triumphs, descended into the underworld to understand the mysteries of death and judgment, and seen how gods and mortals shaped each other through their complex relationships. The arc of this mythology reveals something profound about human nature and aspiration. It begins with raw power, Uranus ruling through fear, Kronos maintaining control by devouring his children. But it evolves towards something more sophisticated. Zeus's reign, however imperfect, represented an attempt to balance power with justice, to create divine authority that served purposes beyond mere domination. The heroes we met along the way embodied humanity's highest aspirations while remaining recognizably human in their flaws and limitations. Heracles showed that strength without wisdom could become a burden. Perseus demonstrated that cleverness could overcome seemingly impossible obstacles. Theseus proved that nobility lay not in avoiding danger, but in choosing to face it for the sake of others. Odysseus revealed that the greatest journeys were internal, transforming the traveler as much as moving them through space. These stories served as more than entertainment, for for the ancient Greeks. They were instruction manuals for living in a world where power was unevenly distributed, where justice was often delayed or difficult to recognize, where individual choices had consequences that rippled outward to affect entire communities. The myths taught that heroism was not about being perfect, but about choosing to act courageously despite uncertainty and fear. The gods themselves, for all their cosmic power, remained essentially recognizable personalities dealing with the same fundamental challenges that face all conscious beings: how to use power responsibly, how to balance personal desires with larger obligations, how to maintain relationships when needs and wants conflict. Their failures were as instructive as their successes, showing that intelligence and strength, without wisdom and compassion, inevitably led to tragedy. Perhaps most importantly, these myths acknowledged the harsh realities of existence while still finding grounds for hope. Death was inevitable, but it wasn't necessarily evil. It was simply part of the natural order that made growth and change possible. Suffering was real and often unfair, but it could also be the price of knowledge, the cost of wisdom, the fuel that powered transformation from one kind of being into another. The Greeks understood that life was essentially tragic, not in the sense of being depressing, but in the classical sense of involving inevitable conflicts between competing goods, impossible choices between equally valid claims, situations where doing the right thing required accepting painful losses. But they also understood that this tragic dimension didn't negate the possibility of beauty, meaning, and genuine achievement. Their myths suggested that the universe operated according to principles that could be understood, even if they couldn't always be controlled. Justice existed, even if it didn't always operate on human timescales or according to human preferences. Meaning could be created through choices and actions, even if individual lives were brief and apparently insignificant against the backdrop of cosmic time. The continued relevance of these ancient stories in our modern world suggests that the Greeks discovered something essential about the human condition that transcends cultural and historical boundaries. We still struggle with questions about power and responsibility, still face conflicts between individual desires and social obligations, still seek meaning in the face of uncertainty and mortality. The words we speak daily carry fragments of these ancient insights. The symbols that surround us in art and architecture connect us to traditions of beauty and wisdom that stretch back across millennia. The stories we tell ourselves about heroism, justice, and the possibility of transformation continue to draw on patterns established in these foundational myths. But perhaps the greatest gift that Greek mythology offers to the modern world is its complex understanding of hope. Hope in these stories is not naive optimism or wishful thinking. It is the hard-won recognition that even in the darkest circumstances, even when facing impossible odds, even when all the obvious strategies have failed, the possibility remains that courage, wisdom, and persistence might still find a way through. The Greeks who created these stories lived in a world as dangerous and uncertain as our own. They faced plagues and famines, wars and natural disasters, political upheaval and social change. Yet they managed to create art and literature of enduring beauty, philosophical insights of lasting value, and social institutions that continue to influence human civilization. Their mythology suggests that this wasn't achieved despite their circumstances, but because of how they chose to respond to those circumstances. They looked directly at the darkness and still found reasons to create light. They acknowledged the reality of suffering and still chose to build something beautiful. They recognized the inevitability of death and still decided that life was worth living fully and well. As you drift towards sleep tonight, perhaps you'll carry with you not just memories of these ancient stories, but some portion of the wisdom they contain. The understanding that heroism is available to anyone willing to choose courage over comfort, wisdom over ease, service to others over narrow self-interest. The recognition that individual choices matter, that the way we treat each other creates the kind of world we all must inhabit. The oil lamps that once illuminated Greek storytellers have long since gone out, but the light they revealed continues to shine across the centuries. In the darkness that surrounds every human life, these ancient voices still whisper their hard-won truths, that consciousness is precious because it is temporary, that beauty matters because it is fragile, that love endures because it chooses to persist despite every reason to surrender. The gods of Olympus may have faded into memory, but the dreams and fears they embodied remain as vital today as they ever were. In their stories, we find not escape from the modern world, but deeper understanding of what it means to be human in any age. Creatures capable of both terrible destruction and incredible creation, blessed with the ability to choose our responses to whatever fate may bring, carrying within our brief lives the possibility of achieving something genuinely worthy of remembrance. Sleep well, knowing that you are part of this ancient story, that your choices contribute to the ongoing human adventure of creating meaning in the vast and starry darkness, that tomorrow offers new opportunities to live up to the heroic potential that these timeless myths remind us lives within every human heart.